Is this ultrasound really yours? Olivia Parker froze mid-step, staring at her phone screen as her coffee trembled slightly in her hand. The hum of the bustling cafe fading into the background as if the world had narrowed down to that single, shocking question. She had been scrolling through emails, trying to finalize a few notes for work, when the phone call came in, the ringtone startling her, and without thinking, she had answered, only to hear the unmistakable authoritative voice of Ethan Montgomery, her CEO boss, asking a question that made her heart stop. The words repeated in her mind, echoing louder than the chatter of patrons and the hiss of the espresso machine, and she felt a flush of panic creeping up her neck. Olivia's eyes darted around the room, noticing the barista arranging pastries, a couple typing away on laptops, completely unaware of the sudden storm in her mind, and she gripped her phone tighter, her fingers white against the smooth surface. She took a slow breath, attempting to steady herself, but the tension in her chest refused to ease. Ethan's voice continued, calm yet firm, pressing for an answer, and Olivia's mind raced to recall every detail that might explain the misunderstanding without revealing too much. She opened her mouth, only to close it again, caught between shock and the urgent need to respond appropriately. Her thoughts tumbled rapidly. How could a simple accidental call escalate to this? What would Ethan think if he knew the full context? She imagined his expression, sharp and calculating, his keen eyes analyzing every word, every hesitation, and she felt an involuntary shiver of awareness at the weight of his attention. Around her, the cafe carried on obliviously, the soft background music blending with the distant chatter, but for Olivia, it was as if time had slowed, every second stretching longer than usual, amplifying the intensity of the situation. Her mind flipped through possibilities, rehearsing explanations, each one more convoluted than the last, yet none seemed sufficient to prevent the looming sense of urgency. She could feel the subtle tension radiating from the phone, the pause in Ethan's tone signaling his expectation and the careful control he exerted even through a digital voice. And it made her realize that every word she chose would carry weight beyond a typical work conversation. Olivia took another deep breath, steadying her voice as best she could, and forced herself to say, "I think there's been a mistake," her words trembling slightly but clear enough to communicate both honesty and composure. She watched as the air seemed to hang in that moment, waiting for Ethan's response, and a strange combination of fear, curiosity, and anticipation surged through her, knowing that whatever came next could shift the course of her professional and personal life in ways she could not yet predict. Every detail of the cafe, the gentle sunlight streaming through the windows, the subtle aroma of fresh pastries, faded into the background as she braced herself for the conversation that was just beginning, a moment where a simple accidental call had spiraled into an event that would challenge her, surprise her, and perhaps change everything. Olivia Parker pressed the phone closer to her ear, trying to steady her racing thoughts as Ethan Montgomery's voice carried over the line, measured but carrying an unmistakable edge of concern and disbelief, and she felt a flutter of anxiety as she searched for the right words to explain the accidental call. The bustling cafe around her faded further into the background, the clinking of cups and the low murmur of conversation blending into a soft hum, leaving only the charged space between her and the voice on the phone. She took a careful sip of her coffee, attempting to calm her nerves, feeling the warmth spread through her hands and briefly grounding her in the present. Her mind raced with possible explanations, each one more convoluted than the last, and she tried to weigh honesty against the risk of further misunderstanding. Ethan asked another pointed question, his tone calm but firm, prompting Olivia to take a deep breath and choose her words with care, her lips parting as she began. "I think there has been a misunderstanding. I was not expecting this call, and I believe I answered by mistake." The slight tremor in her voice betrayed her internal tension, yet she maintained eye contact with the subtle reflection of herself in the polished surface of the counter, anchoring herself as she spoke. She imagined Ethan's expression, sharp and intent, his gaze piercing through the distance of the call, and she felt both fear and a strange sense of anticipation as though each syllable could influence the course of the conversation. Olivia shifted slightly in her chair, adjusting the strap of her purse and the position of her laptop, creating a semblance of composure while internally bracing for whatever response would follow. Ethan's voice paused, then responded thoughtfully, asking for clarification on details that Olivia could only partially provide, and she realized that the simplicity of an accidental call had transformed into a complex moment charged with potential consequences. Her pulse quickened, yet she carefully allowed herself to breathe, organizing her thoughts into coherent sentences and speaking deliberately, making sure that each word reflected sincerity and clarity. The morning sunlight streaming through the cafe windows highlighted the subtle expressions on her face, the slight arch of her brow, the way her eyes widened in response to Ethan's questions, all captured in the soft glow that emphasized both her vulnerability and her determination to handle the situation responsibly. Olivia's thoughts raced, considering how a single misstep could unfold into a turning point in both her professional and personal life, and she recognized the gravity of the interaction, feeling an odd mixture of trepidation and cautious hope as she continued the conversation, knowing that the outcome of this unexpected call could reshape the day in ways she could not yet foresee. Olivia Parker felt her chest tighten as Ethan Montgomery's voice carried a note of quiet incredulity across the phone, each word deliberate, measured, and filled with an intensity that made her grip the table for support, her fingers brushing against the warm ceramic of her coffee cup, the steam rising gently into the morning air as if marking the passage of each heartbeat. The cafe continued its low hum, the soft chatter of other patrons and the clatter of cutlery fading into the background, leaving only the concentrated space of their conversation, a space charged with tension, uncertainty, and unspoken emotion. Olivia's mind raced, attempting to formulate explanations that could satisfy both the urgency in Ethan's tone and the truth she could provide without oversharing, her thoughts flipping rapidly from one possibility to the next, each more intricate than the last. She leaned forward slightly, adjusting the strap of her purse and smoothing the fabric of her blouse, gestures meant to steady her body as her mind struggled to steady itself, while her eyes momentarily followed the sunlight streaming through the window, glinting off the polished surface of the counter and reflecting the fleeting calm she tried to summon. Ethan's questions grew more precise, seeking clarity in a way that indicated both professionalism and personal concern, and Olivia realized that the accidental call had unexpectedly propelled them into a moment of profound significance, a space where each answer and hesitation could alter the unfolding dynamic. She spoke carefully, her voice steadying with each sentence, articulating her uncertainty, explaining the accidental nature of her response, and gently setting boundaries while remaining sincere and transparent, her expressive eyes conveying both remorse and an eagerness to clarify the misunderstanding. She could almost picture his expression, the sharpness of his gaze softening slightly as he absorbed her words, his keen attention evident even through the barrier of a digital voice, and she felt a curious mix of relief and continued anxiety, knowing that this interaction was now more than a simple professional exchange. Olivia's heart continued to race as she navigated the dialogue, mindful of tone, phrasing, and pauses, all while observing the gentle movements of the barista across the room, the faint rustle of pages from a nearby newspaper, and the soft clinking of a spoon against a saucer, mundane details that grounded her even as the stakes of the conversation felt enormous. She took another deliberate breath, letting the warmth of the coffee seep through her hands, and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, acknowledging that this accidental call had created a scenario that would require honesty, tact, and emotional clarity, and she prepared herself to continue engaging with Ethan thoughtfully, aware that the next exchanges could reveal both truth and unexpected connections that neither of them had anticipated, transforming an ordinary morning into a pivotal moment with potential to reshape the trajectory of their relationship. Olivia Parker took a steadying breath, her hand lightly pressing against the edge of the cafe table as she listened to Ethan Montgomery's continued questions, his tone shifting slightly from incredulity to curiosity, carrying an unmistakable undertone of concern that made her chest tighten and her thoughts race with anticipation. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floor and the scattered tables, illuminating the soft expressions of the patrons who remained oblivious to the tension building in the corner where Olivia sat, her mind completely absorbed in the conversation. She adjusted her posture, straightening her back and smoothing her blouse, attempting to project composure even as her heart beat rapidly, each pulse echoing the uncertainty and weight of the situation. Ethan's voice remained calm, yet persistent, asking for details and clarification that required Olivia to navigate carefully between honesty and the desire to avoid further misunderstanding. Each word she spoke measured, deliberate, and tinged with a subtle vulnerability that betrayed her nervousness while conveying sincerity. As she articulated the story of the accidental call, explaining the circumstances with clarity and care, she noticed the gentle flicker of reflection on the glass countertop. Her own anxious expression mirrored back at her, grounding her in the moment while simultaneously emphasizing the gravity of the dialogue unfolding. Around her, the soft murmur of conversation, the faint clatter of cutlery, and the distant hiss of the espresso machine continued in rhythmic background noise. Yet for Olivia, they seemed to fade into insignificance as the focus narrowed entirely onto the verbal exchange, the unspoken emotional layers, and the subtle shifts in tone that communicated far more than the words themselves. She found herself visualizing Ethan's sharp, attentive gaze, imagining the calculations and thoughts behind each pause and question, and the mixture of anxiety and anticipation grew stronger, weaving a complex web of emotions that left her simultaneously apprehensive and oddly exhilarated. Each carefully chosen phrase, each deliberate response, and each pause for thought was laden with meaning, a delicate dance of honesty, clarification, and cautious vulnerability, as Olivia realized that this moment, sparked by an accidental phone call, was evolving into a pivotal encounter with the potential to reshape both professional boundaries and personal connection in ways she had not anticipated. And she prepared herself to continue navigating the conversation with clarity, empathy, and measured confidence, fully aware that every second held significance and that the trajectory of their interaction hung delicately in balance. Olivia Parker's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone, her eyes fixed on the screen as Ethan Montgomery's voice continued to guide the conversation with a blend of authority and quiet curiosity, each word deliberate, probing, and filled with a subtle intensity that made her feel both exposed and understood at the same time. The cafe around her carried on in its usual rhythm, the gentle clinking of cups, the distant chatter of patrons, and the low hum of the espresso machine, creating a soft background that contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere of the call, a space where every syllable seemed to carry weight and significance. Olivia adjusted her posture, sitting up straighter and letting her hands rest on the table to steady herself, her expression a careful mix of composure, nervousness, and determination, revealing the effort it took to navigate such an unexpected and personal exchange. She explained the accidental nature of her answer with measured clarity, her voice calm, yet layered with the subtle emotion of someone facing an unanticipated moment of vulnerability, her eyes glancing momentarily at the sunlight streaming through the window, highlighting the contours of her thoughtful face. Ethan's responses were precise, his questions probing but not accusatory, and Olivia felt the intricate dance of dialogue unfolding, where honesty, discretion, and emotional awareness intertwined to create a tense yet meaningful connection. She allowed herself brief pauses to collect her thoughts, feeling the heat of anticipation rise with each inquiry, and she visualized his expressions, imagining the subtle shifts in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw, and the calmness that contrasted with the underlying shock he could not entirely conceal. The moment stretched with a peculiar intensity, the mundane details of the cafe, spilled sugar on the counter, a couple typing on laptops, the aroma of fresh pastries, fading into insignificance as the focus narrowed to the interplay of voices, the measured cadence of their words, and the careful conveyance of truth and clarification. Olivia felt an odd combination of fear and excitement, aware that this accidental conversation had unexpectedly drawn them into a shared space of understanding, curiosity, and emotional connection that neither had planned, and she allowed herself to listen closely, speak deliberately, and engage fully, knowing that each word could influence not only the immediate outcome, but the potential for trust, comprehension, and an unfolding narrative that might extend far beyond this single morning. The sunlight shifted gently across the room, catching the subtle movements of her hands, the reflective sheen of the table, and the quiet expressions of those around her, while Olivia held her focus on Ethan's voice, aware that this dialogue, sparked by a moment of mistake, was now defining the tone for everything that could come next, a pivotal exchange bridging confusion, revelation, and the first hints of mutual recognition and connection. Olivia Parker felt a subtle shift in the energy of the conversation as Ethan Montgomery's voice softened slightly, the sharp edge of incredulity giving way to a tone that suggested contemplation and cautious understanding, and she allowed herself a small exhale, realizing that the initial shock of the accidental call was evolving into a dialogue with potential clarity and connection. The cafe's background sounds, soft conversations, the faint clatter of cups and spoons, and the low hiss of the espresso machine continued their gentle rhythm. Yet for Olivia, they seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as the focus narrowed entirely to the exchange of voices and the intricate nuances conveyed through tone, pacing, and pauses. She straightened in her seat, adjusting her hands lightly on the table, each movement deliberate to convey calm and attentiveness, while internally processing the weight of Ethan's questions and the subtle shifts in his expressions she imagined through the cadence of his words. Olivia spoke with care, her sentences measured and precise, explaining details with honesty while navigating the delicate balance between providing clarity and maintaining privacy. Her voice steady despite the underlying tension, and she felt a growing sense of agency as she realized that her responses could influence not only the immediate understanding, but also the broader sense of trust and connection. Ethan asked one more detailed question, prompting a pause in Olivia's speech as she collected her thoughts, weighing the best way to articulate the truth while acknowledging the unanticipated emotional weight of the conversation. Her eyes flicking momentarily to the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the soft expressions of other patrons who remained unaware of the high-stakes dialogue occurring at the corner table. The warmth of her coffee seeped through her hands, providing a small comfort and grounding her as she continued, and each deliberate word was chosen to convey transparency, empathy, and thoughtfulness, revealing both her concern for the misunderstanding and her emerging confidence in navigating the situation. Olivia imagined Ethan's reactions, visualizing the subtle flickers of comprehension and intrigue in his gaze, and she felt a delicate tension mixed with cautious hope, a recognition that the accidental call had opened a channel for meaningful communication that neither had expected, but both were now participating in consciously and deliberately. The minutes passed with a heightened sense of awareness, each pause and inflection holding significance, as Olivia and Ethan maneuvered through clarification, mutual acknowledgement, and tentative understanding, the complexity of emotions layering over the mundane cafe environment and transforming an ordinary morning into a pivotal, defining moment where miscommunication, revelation, and the first glimmers of mutual respect and empathy intersected in a way that would shape the unfolding narrative of their intertwined lives. Olivia Parker felt a subtle relief as Ethan Montgomery's tone shifted to a softer, more reflective cadence, the edge of initial disbelief fading into a thoughtful and measured curiosity that allowed her to breathe more steadily while still maintaining a keen awareness of the significance of the conversation. The sunlight streaming through the cafe windows cast a warm glow across her hands and the surface of the table, illuminating the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she absorbed the nuances of his words, each inflection hinting at understanding, caution, and an emerging openness that contrasted sharply with the initial tension. She shifted slightly in her chair, placing her hands lightly on the table and adjusting her posture to convey attentiveness, her expressive eyes reflecting the careful balance of apprehension, focus, and cautious optimism as she prepared to continue navigating the dialogue. Olivia articulated her thoughts with deliberate clarity, explaining details about the accidental call and the surrounding circumstances with honesty and precision, her voice steady yet layered with subtle emotion, revealing both her sincerity and her determination to manage the situation responsibly. Ethan's responses prompted her to consider every nuance, each question a careful probe that demanded thoughtful articulation, and she allowed herself brief pauses to reflect before replying, ensuring her words were measured, truthful, and conveyed the appropriate emotional tone. The ambient sounds of the cafe, the faint clatter of cups, quiet conversations of other patrons, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine continued in the background, but Olivia's focus was entirely on the interaction, her mind parsing the subtleties of tone, cadence, and implied meaning behind each word, creating a heightened sense of awareness and presence. She visualized Ethan's attentive gaze and subtle expressions, imagining the moments of understanding and surprise that flickered behind his composed voice, and this mental projection guided her responses, allowing her to balance transparency with discretion, vulnerability with poise, and concern with clarity. Olivia's thoughts moved quickly, considering the implications of each phrase, the potential for misunderstanding, and the opportunities for building trust, all while maintaining an outward composure that projected confidence and control. Each careful word, deliberate pause, and nuanced expression contributed to an evolving conversation that was transforming a simple accidental call into a pivotal exchange rich with emotional resonance, shared recognition, and emerging mutual understanding. As the dialogue continued, Olivia recognized the rare quality of this interaction, where honesty, patience, and attentiveness intersected to create a meaningful connection, and she felt a cautious optimism that the unfolding conversation could lead to clarity, empathy, and the first steps toward a deeper understanding of both personal and professional dimensions in a scenario neither had anticipated. Olivia Parker felt a growing sense of clarity as Ethan Montgomery's questions became less probing and more conversational, the initial tension in his voice giving way to a calm curiosity that encouraged her to speak freely and thoughtfully, and she allowed herself to lean slightly forward, placing her hands gently on the table while maintaining a composed yet attentive posture. The sunlight poured through the cafe windows, casting soft reflections across the polished wood and highlighting the subtle expressions on her face, the faint arch of her eyebrows, the careful attentiveness in her eyes, all of which mirrored the measured consideration she was applying to every word she spoke. She explained the circumstances of the accidental call with deliberate care, articulating the timeline, her surprise, and her attempts to manage the situation responsibly, her voice steady yet imbued with an undercurrent of vulnerability that revealed the emotional weight of the interaction. Ethan's responses were thoughtful, carrying a tone that balanced professionalism with a hint of personal concern, and Olivia found herself carefully navigating the nuances of phrasing, intonation, and pacing to ensure her words conveyed both honesty and clarity while minimizing further confusion. Around her, the cafe hummed softly with the distant chatter of other patrons, the subtle clinking of cutlery, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. Yet Olivia's awareness remained firmly focused on the conversation, analyzing each inflection, pause, and emphasis for meaning and implication, imagining Ethan's expressions as he processed each explanation. Her chest rose and fell steadily as she allowed herself to breathe, feeling the warmth of the coffee cup seep through her palms, providing a small comfort as she continued to articulate her perspective with calm precision, carefully selecting each word to balance transparency with discretion and emotional clarity. The exchange evolved into a rhythm, a give and take where understanding gradually emerged, the once overwhelming weight of surprise and tension transforming into a tentative connection that neither had anticipated but both were now navigating together. Olivia visualized the subtle changes in Ethan's demeanor, imagining the flicker of recognition, the softening of his tone, and the emergence of curiosity and openness behind his composed voice, and she allowed herself to respond with equal thoughtfulness, using measured sentences and expressive nuance to convey sincerity and attentiveness. Each moment, pause, and carefully chosen phrase contributed to a growing sense of mutual understanding. The accidental call that had sparked initial shock now evolving into a meaningful interaction rich with emotional depth, thoughtful reflection, and the first hints of trust, empathy, and connection, creating a layered narrative where professional boundaries, personal revelation, and human warmth intersected in a way that would shape the trajectory of their relationship moving forward. Olivia Parker felt a quiet sense of resolution settle over her as Ethan Montgomery's voice carried a tone of thoughtful acceptance, the initial shock and tension giving way to understanding and a tentative connection that allowed her to relax slightly while remaining fully engaged in the conversation. The sunlight streaming through the cafe windows bathed the room in a soft glow, illuminating the polished wooden surfaces, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, and the subtle expressions of focus, curiosity, and cautious optimism on her face, each movement and gesture conveying both attentiveness and measured emotion. She leaned slightly forward, hands resting lightly on the table, allowing herself to maintain composure while expressing honesty and clarity, articulating the circumstances of the accidental call with precision, ensuring that each phrase balanced transparency, responsibility, and a hint of personal reflection, her voice calm, steady, and layered with subtle emotion that conveyed the importance of the moment without overwhelming tension. Ethan's responses were deliberate and considered, the cadence of his speech suggesting curiosity, attentiveness, and the gradual emergence of trust as he processed the details she provided, and Olivia imagined the subtle shifts in his expression, the softening of his eyes, the slight relaxation of his posture, all hinting at the development of mutual understanding and empathy. The background sounds of the cafe, the distant chatter of other patrons, the soft clinking of cups and utensils, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine remained, but they seemed peripheral, framing the dialogue without intruding, allowing the conversation between Olivia and Ethan to hold the central focus, a dynamic exchange where tone, word choice, and careful pauses carried far more weight than the words themselves. Olivia allowed herself a deep, measured breath, feeling the warmth of the coffee cup against her hands as a subtle anchor, and continued the dialogue with thoughtful responses, each carefully considered to convey sincerity, attentiveness, and a growing sense of connection, while maintaining the professionalism and clarity required in the delicate context of their interaction. She noted the evolving rhythm of the conversation, the ebb and flow of questions, explanations, and brief silences that created a space where both could reflect, respond, and gradually understand the implications of the accidental call, the revelation it contained, and the shared recognition of unforeseen circumstances that now bound them in a unique, meaningful exchange. With each careful word and thoughtful response, the initial tension transformed into a layered narrative of comprehension, trust, and empathy, establishing a foundation for future interactions where personal insight, mutual respect, and an emerging emotional connection could unfold, leaving Olivia with a sense of cautious hope, clarity, and the recognition that a single unexpected call had created a pivotal moment capable of reshaping the trajectory of both her professional and personal relationship with Ethan, marking the beginning of a new chapter defined by understanding, openness, and the promise of further discovery.